morning, and thank you so much for joining us. My name's Imani Rupert Gordon, and I'm the Executive Director for Affinity Community Services. Affinity is a social justice organization, and we work with Black LGBTQ women and other LGBTQ communities of color on the south side of Chicago. Before we get started, I want to say thanks to Anna Deshawn and Erica Payne. Thank you so much for helping us during our time here at CAN TV. This is a call-in show, so if you are interested in asking a question or if you have something to say, you can call us at 312-738-1060, and Anna or Erica will answer and put you through. So today, our guest is Eric Glynn, and Eric is the Executive Director of the Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus. And the mission of the caucus is to advance health equity among Black, gay, bisexual, and same-gender loving men by developing community-centered leadership and innovative programs.
Thank you for having me, Imani.
Thank you so much for being here, Eric. Such a pleasure. And so today, it's June, and I'm hoping that we'll have a conversation talking about Pride celebrations, what they mean to us and what they mean for the movement. But before we get started, I actually wanted to just do a quick overview of Pride celebrations and how they came about. I was thinking about this earlier this month because, well, I actually probably think about it every June, but when I was in undergrad, I was thinking about the first woman that I'd ever dated, and I was dating her at that time, and I started thinking more broadly about the LGBTQ movement and how it started. And I was realizing that I never actually knew how it started. And so I left class that day and I went and I started doing research, and I was wondering, would I remember if something was to jog my memory, would I say, oh, this is it? But I realized that I hadn't heard anything about it. And so I read about the Stonewall riots that day, and Stonewall riots are widely considered the start of the LGBTQ movement in this country. And I remember when I originally read about it, the part that stood out to me was that, so the Stonewall Inn is a bar in New York, and LGBTQ folks would be there. They'd get harassed by police about once a week, and during this particular day, what I'd read was that it was the it was the day of Judy Garland's funeral, and people were experiencing grief because they were a large supporter of Judy Garland. A lot of LGBTQ folks would go to her piano bar, and they were experiencing grief because it was her. They were experiencing grief because it was her funeral, but then also being harassed by police. That was just too much that day, and that was the start. I found out, that's what I read when I was younger. But then when I came a bit later, what happened was I recognized that I had to be more thoughtful about thinking about folks of color, and by this time there were some more nuanced readings that I could do, and I realized that there's actually probably some Black and brown folks that were involved here that weren't mentioned, and that was obviously true. And we know that Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson played a large role in the Stonewall riots, but to just close this out, to remember that when we're thinking about the history of everything, if we're not being inclusive of folks of color, of young folks, of trans and gender nonconforming folks, to make sure that we do that, because oftentimes these stories are left out. But the Pride parades are actually held every year in June as the anniversary of these riots. And so just a quick introduction there. But Eric, I wanted to start off by asking you, what is your favorite Pride memory? Like, what's your first Pride, or what's your best Pride memory?
Well, that's a good question. I've been to a lot of Prides. Right. I remember my first Pride. Yeah. My first Pride, I was 18 years old, and it was Michigan State Pride. Okay. So, statewide Pride, and I remember it because it was my first one. I remember it also because I learned that Black people do sunburn. I also remember that I was with a family who brought their 12-year-old son with us. Okay. And I just remember that being a big deal because I thought, well, I'm 18 and I'm only going because my parents don't know, and someone else brought me. Okay. But the idea that two parents, like two straight parents, would bring their 12-year-old child, and we got along so well. Like, I don't have any brothers, so I was like, oh my God, this gay little boy who's so gay. It just, like, made me just realize the possibilities in the world, and it just inspired me to expect more from what, my circumstances were. I'm a kid from Detroit, and when I would hear about Pride or think about Pride, it was always like what the white people were doing in the suburbs. Only recently has Detroit Pride moved down into the actual city as opposed to being out in the suburbs. So I'm excited for the kids in Detroit who were able to experience that in a way that I had to travel pretty far to get to.
Yeah. I remember my first Pride as well. We had this routine that we would go and I was in San Francisco at the time, or near San Francisco, and so on Friday night we would go to the Trans March, and then on Saturday we would go to the Dyke March, and then on Sunday was the Pride Parade, and that's what we would do every year. But I always remember that people not from the community would say, do you need all of these different marches? Like, why does Pride have to be split up that way? And I know the caucus does a lot for Black Pride as well. So we celebrate the whole month of June, and then in Chicago, Black Pride happens the first weekend in July. And so I was wondering, why do you think it's necessary to be so diverse in our celebrations of Pride?
Well, first off, I'd say all the Prides that I've been to that have been more community specific have always been so much more fun. And I wonder if it's because it's more intimate, because it's more focused, or, to go there. And part of why the caucus is here in the first place is because when we talk about the larger LGBT community, sometimes it's easy to get lost in the mix.
Yeah.
I liken it to saying, you go to your family reunion because you want to come home. You want to come to a place that feels familiar. You don't have to explain yourself. There are other people who are like you. And you could get that from your extended family. You can get that from your friends. Absolutely. For a lot of us, it's a little different when we get so much closer to home and closer to family. So it's exciting to think that we're able to experience the larger LGBT community or our larger Black community, and then also our Black LGBTQ community. So in terms of the work of the caucus, we try to highlight those because we know we don't get those spaces very often. And I know that this is something that Affinity does too, that as soon as we create that space, and it seems like such a simple thing, people come and you see this kind of magic start to emerge, and by the time that they leave, I'll have people walk up to me and say, "Thank you so much, I don't get this."
Yeah.
And you think, what Pride should be able to provide. Absolutely. Pride started as a way to say, literally, we're here, we're queer, and either get used to it, get over it, we're not going anywhere. It started very queer, it started very brown and Black. Today, Pride doesn't always look that way. And so I hear a lot of calls from community members to say, where's the Pride that speaks to me? And so we still have work to do. Where is the spirit of riot, the spirit of resistance that we require even much more today within our political landscape and socially conservative landscape that's starting to reemerge or tussle kind of with more progressive values? Where are the Pride events that speak more to me kind of in my day-to-day life? So, I like to read books, I like to do sports, I like to do all these other things. I have a hard time finding those, or I like to a cappella, someone said to me the other day. It's hard to find those type of opportunities in a way that feels close to home. And so I understand and I can imagine, and we can talk about this more, that to some that might actually sound like self-segregation, this term that people put out. The way that I like to think of it is that there's something special about, again, being relieved of the duty to have to explain yourself, to have to struggle with others, to be at this point where you don't have to defend who you are. So, yeah, a lot in there.
Great, thank you so much. I was also thinking, I don't get this much in my immediate circle, and I imagine you don't as well, but often during June we start hearing, if there's a gay pride, why isn't there a straight pride? And I was wondering, when you hear that, what do you think?
Well, there's this thing where, if we talk from a social justice perspective, oppression models, power and privilege, what have you, part of being in the majority, or part of being in a privileged status, is that you don't know that that's what's going on. Right. And that the privilege hides itself, and to you that may seem a very normal experience. And so for those of us who don't have that experience, when we say, hey, we don't experience things the same way, we're not getting the same, there isn't equity in terms of how we get treated, the resources that are disseminated towards our communities. So I can imagine that for people in that situation, so white people, for men, that we may think to ourselves, well, hey, why are they getting special treatment over there? When really it's a call of the oppressed to say, I'm creating my space because this is important, and generally the rest of at-large space belongs to the majority all the time. Can I just have this one piece of something?
Yeah, I completely understand. You know, people die for who they are, who they love, and if folks just want to claim, you know, one day, one weekend, 1 month, you know, that they can be who they are and be open about who they are, then I just think that's beautiful. You know, if we get to a place where this is not what we have to think about at all, you know, I would love to see for this, so that folks aren't being discriminated against based on sexual orientation or gender identity. I'd love to be so far away from that when I see a Pride Parade, I'm like, the traffic. I would love for that to be the case.
That's
what I'd love to do. You know, honestly, I would be just as happy as anyone else if that were the case.
We were talking about this out in the hall, that, I mean, what a special experience still to see movies that represent our lives. When we talk about Moonlight, and say, oh my God, Moonlight is such a standout, not just in terms of the quality of the movie, but in terms of the characters and the life experience that are being shown.
Yes.
That is such a rarity that, of course, we need Pride. We still need to carve out these spaces, because as long as a movie like Moonlight and the characters depicted there are so rare, we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that we're represented across the field.
Yeah. Great. Thanks so much. It looks like we have a caller. Go ahead and put him through. Caller, you here?
Hi.
Hi.
I just want to make a comment.
Yeah.
If we go back into our biblical history and go back and read about Caesar, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. Caesar was gay and he roamed the Roman Empire. Go back to the biblical history and look it up, and you will see that I'm not lying. I'm 73 years old, and I have family members that are gay, and I love them to death. And pride, what pride means is that you can step out that closet. You got a lot of pride to be yourself.
You are too kind.
Thank you.
Be yourself. That's what pride means.
I want a t-shirt that says be yourself.
Thank you. Both be blessed.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, caller. We appreciate that. We do know that there's a long history of LGBTQ folks, and we know that that's true. You know, it's not that folks have never existed, and so it is lovely to see representation through prides and through celebrations, and also through media. It's important to see all of those things. So,
in particular, Black LGBTQ people.
Yes.
You know, we say, well, we can look back through history and see examples of like homosexuality, however that gets interpreted at the culture of the time, in the place wherever it was. But in terms of our stories, we still have so much to even uncover still. We have so much history that's being, you know, on one hand you could just say, oh, well, there's just so much history out there, it's hard to get to all of it. There is history that has not been risen to the surface and given to us so that we know we were here. 100 years ago, there were vibrant Black queer communities that were doing what they could do to survive together. More in secret, absolutely, than today, but they were there.
right.
I want to know those stories.
Yes.
I don't want it to be secret. Still don't want Moonlight to be like this rare movie. I think like when I was 12 years old, I would have loved to just come across a movie about another 12-year-old boy who was Black and gay and just doing his thing, and he was the main character in the story. And maybe that could have been a true story from many, many years ago.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and I think another thing, what I kind of rushed through this, but, you know, oftentimes when our history is told and retold, is that sometimes communities of color, trans and queer people are sometimes left out of it. And, that's something that I was trying to get across in this very brief talk about the history of Pride celebrations, that very often trans women of color are left out of discussions, and that we want to make sure that that's
Was
not
that last
happening.
year when Stonewall, the movie, came out?
Yes.
And the main character was a white man?
Yes.
And you're like, well, geez. And what a way to rewrite the story of Stonewall.
Right,
And,
right.
and Stonewall wasn't about a particular person in the first place.
Mhm.
So I could understand a stylistic choice to say, okay, we need a point of view character.
Mhm.
But again, you can ask yourself, how often do we get a white point of view?
Yes.
And not because it's bad in and of itself, but because we all need a turn. And we're not all getting a turn. And particularly with Stonewall, because it was a historical event, actual things that we could point to happen.
Right.
And so to rewrite that, and for the director to come out very vehemently and say, and to deny the history
Right.
of our trans siblings
Mhm.
in the forefront,
Right.
was just, it
Yeah.
takes a lot of patience to get through.
No, it does. I said this when I read about this before. It was, the early 2000s, and a book I had read after that. That's where I found out that there are more queer and trans and young folks and people of color. One of the things I read is that it wouldn't be possible for the people that were at Stonewall were probably not actually listening to Judy Garland. They were probably people that were more likely to listen to R&B, maybe rock, but R&B. And so that's just an interesting thing to think of when we're looking at our history. That it just takes a lot of digging to see folks like us.
Well, and it's interesting to stitch that together with what's going on today. And then we see that black people are many times responsible for new social trends that get reinterpreted and made palatable for the masses, and we know who the masses are, by those who are not part of the community.
Right, so you're talking about appropriating.
Yes.
So that is, that's a big thing. Thinking about who benefits. There are oftentimes, styles, clothing. A variety of things that are culturally significant. But when people of color are wearing them or using them, then very often they're it's not seen as professional or something. And then as other people, as like in this case, as white people start wearing them, then they're just treated differently. And so that's something I think about.
And the salient quote now, what is it? They want our culture, but not our struggle. And so to use words that are popularized by black queer people, but not really to care at all about the welfare of black queer people is it's troubling.
Yeah. Looks like we have another caller. Go ahead, caller. Hello? Caller, are you here?
Yes?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah, hi. Go ahead, caller. Do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Go ahead.
For some reason, I can't hear you that well.
Oh, we can hear you though. Feel free to go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, so my question is, there's been a lot of tremendous progress in terms of the gay rights movement and et cetera. But from where you're sitting now, what areas or what would you like to see changed or improved upon or just eliminated at this point in time as far as the gay movement itself?
Oh.
Ooh.
Well, that's a big question.
We're being asked to dream big. I like
I know.
this.
Would you like to go first?
No, that's I don't know where to start.
Sure. Well, I'd like to see every person be able to live their life authentically without fear of discrimination. That's what I would love to see.
So perfect at just taking it right there.
If we're wishing,
That is it.
if we can wish for anything, I think that's what we're trying to do with everything. It looks like we have a caller again. Want to make sure we get to you. Go ahead, caller.
Yeah. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure what your topic is tonight, but I just heard you say, and that's okay. I listen to you all off and on, quite a bit. I'm just late tonight.
Hmm.
I just heard you say that, you would have loved to have been a 12-year-old gay child being able to pick up some literature and learn about some history where as a gay child you possibly would have learned where you fit in or even just read about your lifestyle. I call myself a budding writer, okay? And my first piece of gay literature was called The Front Runner by Patricia Warren. And since I want to do this writing, because I grew up on the west side of Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
North Lindale, which is supposed to be one of the most horriblest places you could want to grow up, and I survived. That's why I know I need to tell my story. And I was just curious, what was you all's first pieces of gay literature? And if possible, if you remember your first piece of gay colored literature. My first piece of, and I'm going to get off in a minute, my first piece of colored gay literature was Josephine and Elin Harris, Just As I Am, and Brother something, I can't even remember it. But I was an adult when I started seeing that, so
Yeah.
I could tell you stories from when I'm a kid, that when I was a kid trying to survive, I think I can make your hair curl. But I also think it's good reading. So I'm just curious, what was your first pieces? And I'm going to try to find them because that's going to help me with my writing.
Oh. Well, thank you for the question. That's fascinating.
Thank you for taking the
Yeah.
call.
Thank you. Well, let me see. So, I don't remember my first. Wait, no, it's coming to me. I I don't know about fiction, but I remember picking up XY magazine when I was in high school. And like I was scared to death because one of the teachers took it away because I brought it to school and I was like showing it to like some friends that I had. And the fun part of it is that the issue that I had, I wish I could find it, the boy on the cover looked like me because he was all just like waifish and thin and had this kind of wild hair and was like brown skin and racially ambiguous. And he was super cool. But the first piece of fiction that I read was B-Boy Blues.
Yeah.
Now, which is funny to me. I think that it was at a time where Elin Harris was popular. But I remember hearing about the stories and just being like, that doesn't sound interesting in terms of my life experience. Because I was still pretty young at the time. And B-Boy Blues, although it didn't speak necessarily specifically to my experience, was so much fun.
Yeah.
That I was all about it.
That's a good one. I remember, I'm trying to think, my very first, the first that I can think of was Stone Butch Blues. I remember that changed my life. I just thought that was just brilliant. But the first person of color that I can remember actually came later. There's a series by Nikki Rashawn. And I don't remember the name of it. They are the cutest little. They're really cute books. Like they're the first one was really kind of. It was a meet cute. It was a little bit, but it was really really cute. But I remember the first movie that I watched was. What was it? It had Ellen DeGeneres in it. It was If These Walls Could Talk Too.
Oh.
It was the second one.
Oh my gosh.
I remember that was. I remember there was. There were all these different vignettes, and I remember there was one that just really stood out to me. They were just talking about what it was like to be a feminist and also to be queer and also to be sort of accepting of people that they were dating and their gender identity. And it was. I remember when I saw that, it just blew my mind. It just blew my mind.
Yeah. It's funny, I'm a new uncle.
Oh,
so,
congratulations.
And I think a lot about what I want to be able to provide my niece, just so that she has an opportunity to really see what the world looks like. And my sister her mother is very dedicated to that too. And so I need to start getting children's books, because I know that there's a variety out there right now.
There's so many.
And see what we can do. I know we talk a lot about the future generation. We have opportunities.
Lovely. Well, Thank you so much, Eric, for being here.
Thanks for having.
Of course. So we do this show once a month, the fourth Friday of the month at 6:30. So if you want to come back, we talk about LGBTQ issues, issues dealing with folks of color, and intersectional issues as well. If you want to find out more about Affinity Community Services, you can find us at affinity95.org. And for the caucus, you can, what's your website?
So you can go to www.shyblackgaycaucus.org. Or you can simply go into Google and put Chicago Black Gay Men's Caucus. Don't worry, the order of the words doesn't matter. You will find us.
Lovely. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Thanks so much. Take care.